We got actually a tremendous, probably 50 or 60 questions. So let me apologize that we're absolutely not going to get to all of them. The president's had a very, very long day. I was very struck that you have set some very ambitious goals. I'd say that the question about not needing foreign assistance in 10 years' time is laudable and ambitious and well calibrated for your meetings on the Hill today. And the way that you could do that is by replacing that income through domestic sources. And so you mentioned that you had, and the way to do that is through building the tax base. And you said that you needed to prioritize your priorities. And you listed many things that were challenges and that might be holding back private sector activity. What are your, if you want to increase the tax base, what are your priority areas to try to do that over the medium and long term?
Infrastructure. And we've identified three main areas: roads, power, and ports. Roads because it enables our people to go back to the farms, but to be able to get their produce to market. It increases mobility. It gets economic activity going into the rural areas. Power, because we cannot industrialize. We cannot add value unless we get the energy that is needed by the major entities that will be operating. And so ports, obviously, if we're going to be able to get our exports going and be able to have efficiency in serving the people through imports, we've got to get ports, seaports, airports. So I think those are the main constraints.
So each of those three infrastructure areas are not priorities that the U.S. government tends to fund. These are areas that other either private sector actors or other donors tend to fund. So I'm going to turn our first question is from Callisto Madavo from Georgetown, which is if you could comment on China's role. It took the first question to get to China and Africa. China's role, and if you could comment specifically on China in Liberia.
China is aggressive in Africa. Liberia, no exception. Obviously, their main concern is for raw material, but they also participate in infrastructure. Sometimes on barter arrangements, which Liberia does not participate or subscribe to. China is not as big in Liberia as it is in many other places, but specifically, they have won an international bid for one of our mining companies. And they're bidding for other things like petroleum blocks and others. They've been helpful to us in agriculture. And they've built some pretty impressive infrastructure for us. Our major university was built by them and their support. An agriculture demonstration research center was built by them. A major modern hospital in one of our rural counties was built under the bilateral program for China. They like big footprints, big stadiums, big schools, big hospitals that stand out, not necessarily the things that lead to sustainability, through capacity building and education and health systems that really something. So it's a different approach. We know that sometimes China is charged with bringing in workers and thereby displacing or preventing local workers from doing that. But I think that depends upon the country leadership and the government, because that you can control very well. You can just lay down some strict rules and say you're not going to have, other than skilled workers coming to the country. So we've not had in Liberia a flooding of people, taking the jobs. In fact, they do a lot of our construction work, road construction work, with support from essentially the World Bank and our infrastructure fund. And the reason they succeed there is that we need to get more entities from the US and from Europe to compete for these. And frankly, the Chinese live a lowly life, a moderate life, and they work hard. They work 24 hours a day. Let me just say that. Don't have any China fear. Liberia is well entrenched in its relationship with the West. And that's not going to change.
I've always thought that the concerns about China and the idea that the United States is somehow competing with China like a new Cold War in Africa was something that people maybe in Washington sitting at their desks would imagine, but when you're out in the field, it's actually not like that.
You're right.
And so I'm glad to hear that you're confirming my hunch.
In fact, we have the U.S. and China working together at our university, each one taking a different part of it, trying to rebuild the university. And it's been a good, Liberia, China, and U.S. have done some good things in partnership.
You mentioned that you've started exporting under AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. As somebody who worked on it before, but now on the outside, I can be a little bit more blunt. I think it's been quite disappointing, actually. It's been too complicated, the fact that it's uncertain whether it will be extended, the third-party provision rules. So it could be tweaked to be made better, but I think that we're probably coming to a moment in the United States where we need to do something more than AGOA and just tweak it at the margins. Is there anything that you could see or suggest that you think would be especially helpful for Liberia or West Africa that the United States could do much differently, particularly in the areas of infrastructure that you mentioned that's not been the sweet spot of the United States?
As related specifically to AGOA or generally?
Either, up to you.
The one thing we've been pushing for the United States to do that could move Liberia is the reconstruction of our hydro plant. Mm-hmm. I mean, that for us is the key, because the power that we have today is coming from thermal generation, and increases in petroleum prices just make it totally unaffordable, particularly by the poor.